Hi everyone, and welcome once again to another episode of the Microsoft Power Night. You should be surprised that we're holding these, during the day. Yes, there's a bit of change in the plan because we have to accommodate the location of our guest today. Our guest, Nandip Nashan, is coming from India, and there's a bit of time difference, and we need to accommodate that as well. So thank you wherever you're joining us from, either from Twitter, Periscope, either from LinkedIn Live, or from YouTube directly. Today we have a very great thing to present, something that you will learn, open your mind to possibilities and a lot of things that is possible, especially with Microsoft SharePoint Framework with Microsoft Teams. How do you integrate them together? How do you even build applications using the same Microsoft SharePoint Framework? Okay, so while I introduce the guest, I will like to take 30 seconds countdown while I encourage everyone to please like this video and also share with people within your network on WhatsApp status so that they can join us. Okay, let us have a 30 seconds countdown and we'll come back and I will introduce the guest. Thank you and see you soon. Welcome back, and it is another episode of Microsoft Power Night. Okay, so right now I'm going to show us what we have to present today, the topic we're dealing with and how we are going to handle that. Right, just a second while I make that happen. Okay, thank you. So I'm going to speak through our guest. The topic today is how to build an application that can work on Microsoft Teams using SharePoint Framework. I'm not sure if you know SharePoint Framework, but it is something that we're going to learn today. So you will learn what SharePoint Framework is and how to even work with it to build an application. And we have our guest, Nandip Nashan. So, but why do we have to learn this? What benefit does this have for everyone, especially in organization today? Remember, if your organization is using Microsoft Teams, which most likely they should, because most organizations in this part of the world are on Office 365. Microsoft Teams has also become the hub for collaboration and productivity. And we see from the strategy of Microsoft itself, a lot of integration are made possible now to Teams. So not just for chatting and having meetings, to execute, to run approval, to run applications, to do several other things, becoming that hub where you can access everything about collaboration and productivity. And since the lockdown, the world was hung on the cloud. Software as a service applications were all over there. They came to our rescue. And a lot of organizations that were on-prem before, they couldn't because they're working from home. They have to leverage on the cloud technology. And the fact here is that there's no going back. Collaboration and productivity is here to stay, and they're going to remain, they're going to be driven by cloud solutions. Then the ability for every individual to leverage on the available services, make them interoperable. Take, for example, this is Microsoft Teams. And within that Teams, you're able to build an application using SharePoint Framework, and you integrate that to Microsoft Teams. And you're able to use that application even within Teams. So what you've done there is to make different services interoperable. They're able to talk to each other, and that way you are increasing the level of flexibility around your business, which is going to define innovation in this space. And in this edition of Microsoft Power 9, we will learn how to build a Microsoft Teams application with SharePoint Framework. So I'm going to ask you to join me as I welcome our guest, Nashan Nandip. Hi, Nandip.
Hello, hello. Thank you very much for that introduction. Yeah, and I hope everyone is very much excited on this topic. All right. Okay. So should I share my screen?
Yes, yes.
All right. Okay. Just let me know when you can see it, and we can and
Yes,
when we
we
can
can see your
start.
screen now.
All right. Okay then. Great. So hello everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, and then welcome to Microsoft Power Night this version, and then thank you very much for having me here. So the topic of discussion for today is how you can build Microsoft Teams app with SharePoint framework, because Microsoft Teams is one of the mostly used platform for collaboration. So it is not at all just limited for the chat or just the conversation between each other, but at the same time we can take it more towards creating the apps on those Microsoft Teams, and then with those apps we'll be able to share the information and even work out various capabilities within Microsoft Teams. And when it comes to the development of these apps with Microsoft Teams, even SharePoint framework gives more options for us so that we can build those Microsoft Teams apps within by using SharePoint framework. So the agenda for this session is like we will have introduction to SharePoint framework. Just in case if you have not heard of SharePoint framework or not have used that before, SharePoint framework is again kind of an uh, model by which you will be able to develop your apps on top of modern SharePoint. And then again we will see how Microsoft Teams and SharePoint they work both well with each other, and then we will see how we can extend SharePoint framework to Microsoft Teams by creating the apps, or how we can easily or natively bring all those apps that we have inside SharePoint to Microsoft Teams. And then we can see like how those apps which are developed using SPFX, those can be easily ported to Microsoft Teams app. And then we will have Q&As, but again, for example, if you have any of the Q&As at the start, please feel free to post your questions to the chat window, and then we will get it answered. All right, so I hope that sounds very interesting. So before we start the session, a quick introduction of myself. So myself, Nandadeep Nathan, I'm from Pune, India. I'm mostly working on SharePoint, Office 365, and Microsoft Azure. I'm Microsoft MVP for Office Apps and Services, as well as Microsoft Certified Trainer, author of couple of books on SharePoint framework, as well as SharePoint hybrid with SharePoint 2019. And on to the right hand side, here are few social handles by which you can get in touch with me. So you can send out me an email. You can get in touch me on LinkedIn or Twitter, or here is the space where I write most of my articles. All right. Okay. So we quickly get started with our topic, like what is mean by SharePoint framework, and then how we can start using that SharePoint framework. All right. Just to check, like, can you hear me okay? Because at least I hear some background noise.
I can hear you.
Okay, all right, all right, okay, great. Okay, so let's see like how this SharePoint framework, what is the SharePoint framework is, and then how we can build apps for this modern SharePoint. Okay, so SharePoint is evolving over the years, and it is almost that we have been using SharePoint for almost 20 years. SharePoint started in the year of 2001 with the version of SharePoint 2001. Then we have various versions of SharePoint, including SharePoint 2003, 2007, which was called as a MOS. Then we had SharePoint 2010, 2013, 2016, and the recent on-premises version is 2019. But at least all those versions were on-premises, wherein we maintain SharePoint on our own servers. We create a farm for our SharePoint work, and then from there we develop solutions on top of it. But the magic started when we had Office 365 in place. So now that SharePoint is part of Office 365, and then we are using SharePoint as a software as a service from Microsoft 365 stack. So the SharePoint is evolving over the years. The SharePoint Classic experience was introduced in late 2002, and since then, Microsoft continued adding new features on top of it. However, around the year of 2017, Microsoft rolled out a new modern SharePoint based on a new modern up-to-date web technologies. So modern SharePoint appeals to user with a fresh look and new modern experience, which is designed using modern web technologies, and also it works responsively with mobile devices and provides overall usability features. So whenever it comes to the modern SharePoint framework is one of the or mostly used option for creating those apps inside those modern SharePoint, right? So let's see like the SharePoint framework in a nutshell. So the SharePoint custom development gradually shifted from server side to the client side with the introduction of client side object model from Microsoft, which allowed us as a developer to connect to the SharePoint sites remotely. The manage client side object model, that means CSOM, JavaScript object model, for example, JSOM, and the REST APIs were being used effectively by SharePoint developers to carry out the customizations. However, excessive use of JavaScript across the SharePoint site, for example, inside any of the script editor or container web parts, or even in the custom actions which got included onto the SharePoint site, it became very unmanageable. And then the modern SharePoint does not support direct injection of JavaScript on the SharePoint side. The customizations are only allowed using SPFX web parts or the extensions. The SPFX brought in the governance around this kind of an issue. So at least in the last few years, SharePoint framework has become very popular and has become the first choice of modern SharePoint developers. SharePoint has become richer with its every release, and eventually a modern SharePoint has evolved. The SharePoint framework plays a very important role in customizing the modern SharePoint. At the same time, it also supports classic SharePoint as well as the modern SharePoint. So the SPFX solutions are developed using open source toolchains, modern UI standards, and JavaScript libraries or frameworks like AngularJS, React.js, Knockout.js, or even with the Handlebar.js. So, for example, if you are coming from the open source kind of an background, you can easily learn SharePoint framework. Uh, the SharePoint framework is in turn it is a page and web part model which provides full support for client-side SharePoint development. It offers easy integration with SharePoint data. Also, we can extend it to Microsoft Teams, which is the major topic of discussion for today. And with the SharePoint framework, we can use modern web technologies and tools in our preferred development environment. So it could be Windows, it could be Linux, or even it could be a Mac OS. And build the productive experiences and apps which are responsive as well as mobile ready. So we can also use modern JavaScript web frameworks, tools, and libraries to build SPFX based solutions. SPFX is generally available in SharePoint Online. We can use as it is. Also, it supports on-premises version starting from SharePoint 2016 onwards. Also, just one thing to note that in order to use SPFX in SharePoint Server 2016 on-premises, we will have to install SharePoint 2016 Feature Pack 2 on that server. On the other hand, for SharePoint Server 2019, SPFX is supported out of the box without any installation or any of the prerequisites. But again, we can use the latest version of SharePoint framework in the cloud, that means in the SharePoint Online. In SharePoint 2016, we can just use the version 1, as well as with SharePoint 2019, we can just use version 1.4.1. But all right, so with that background, let's see how we can use this SharePoint framework. So the story behind SharePoint framework as well as SharePoint goes something like this. So when it comes to SharePoint, we do have various SharePoint sites. So here is one example of how the SharePoint site looks like. So we have our data in the form of documents or even in the form of items which are stored in this particular SharePoint sites. So we have a huge amount of data that we store inside SharePoint sites. But again, that is not just the end of it. Then we have something called as SharePoint Framework or SPFX, using which we will be able to develop some good looking web parts or apps, you can say, which are something like this, wherein we are trying to showcase some kind of an hierarchy of data using SPFX. So all that data, the source for that data will be from any of the SharePoint list. Again, we can probably create some kind of an configurable apps. So from here you can see onto the right hand side, we can configure that particular app, like how it can appear onto the SharePoint site, and then it can connect to that SharePoint site. It can get the data from that SharePoint site, and then we will be able to showcase this data in a nice presentable format onto SharePoint site. So this SharePoint framework, it is not just for SharePoint sites, but it is kind of an use as a for developing the enterprise solutions. So first one is that it can be used with Microsoft Teams, which is a very familiar platform as of now. So we can build our Microsoft Teams tab as well as Microsoft Teams personal app. Even we can create the Microsoft Teams messaging extensions. Even we can create the Teams app meeting experience with Microsoft Teams. Uh, Also, we can use SPFX with Microsoft Graph. So we can make the Graph API calls from SPFX Solution, as well as we can interact across all the Microsoft 365 apps and services that we have. So for example, if you want to show the emails from the users in SPFX Solution, even yes, it can be done. Obviously, we will need some kind of an privileges that needs to be set on that solution, but it is possible. Again, with SPFX, we will be able to call Power Automate flows from SPFX. So probably on a click of a button, we want to automate something by calling the Power Automate flows. Even yes, it is possible. Even with SPFX, we can create add-ins for Outlook, so that whenever any of the email arrives, we want to take some action on it. So in that case, we can create that SPFX web part, and it can be exposed as an add-in in a Outlook. So the topic of discussion for this session is mostly concentrated around Microsoft Teams, but just wanted to show you that it is not just limited to Microsoft Teams, but you can use that all across your enterprise solutions. All right. So that gives the idea of how flexible as well as how powerful SharePoint framework solutions can be. All right, so let's see how this Microsoft Teams and SharePoint they better work together. I know this is maybe a very basic slide for everyone, but just wanted to put this slide in front of our discussion because this will set the foundation for our discussion for the rest of the hour. So what happens generally is we do have Microsoft Teams, and then we have SharePoint sites with us. So in the Office 365, whenever we create any of this team, so let's say we call it as a demo team. In that case, in the background, it creates a team, oh sorry, a SharePoint site called as /site/demo team, and then once the team is created, we have certain channels associated with that channel, sorry, with that team. So we have this demo team. Under that, we have this out of the box channel, which is available to us called as a general channel. And what happens is that under the same SharePoint site, we uh, SharePoint by default creates one library called as shared documents, and under that we can see one folder called as a general, and all of the documents that gets uploaded to this general channel will be stored in this SharePoint site. So Teams is a kind of an interface for us to share the information with the users, but in the background, everything gets stored into SharePoint. Same way, for example, if we go ahead by creating one more public channel in this particular team, then what happens in the background is that all of the documents which gets uploaded to this particular channel gets stored in this shared documents under public channel folder. Let's take it to the some complication that, let's say for example, we create a private channel. So private channel by its name says that we want to share some kind of an private data. So to handle that, what happens is that in the background, uh, a new SharePoint site collection gets created called as your team name hyphen private channel. Inside that, again, we do have a shared document library created out of the box by SharePoint. And then inside that, we have a folder with that particular channel name, and all of the documents that gets uploaded to this private channel gets stored here. So at least this slide laid the foundation about how the Microsoft Teams and Microsoft SharePoint works together. All right. So what is the connection between those two? And then we will see like all of the customizations that we have on top of SharePoint, how then we can bring it to Microsoft Teams. All right. So again, just one thing to note that SharePoint is w- with us for more than 20 years. So just on March 28, 2021, we celebrated 20th birthday of SharePoint. So that means SharePoint is now more than 20 years of old. So if you consider this statement, in that case, we have been using SharePoint for developing our solutions more than 20 years. So I know that probably those solutions may be on premises, just focusing on to that on-premises scenario. But now that since SharePoint is being used as an enterprise level kind of a solution, we have imported all those solutions from on-premises to this online world or this cloud world. So we have our solutions which we have been using or rather developing on this SharePoint since last 20 years. So now the question is that we have all these SharePoint apps we have onto SharePoint. Now, how we can take those to Microsoft Teams and make them Microsoft Teams app? Because let's say we have some kind of a solution developed already on SharePoint apps. So we don't want to again reinvent the wheel and recreate those from scratch into Microsoft Teams. But rather, what we want is that we want to just use those solutions as it is into Microsoft Teams. So in this particular session, we will see like how we can bring all those apps that we had created so far natively into the Microsoft Teams. All right. Okay. So then let's see like what are the extensibility options that we have with SPFX by which we can extend our SharePoint apps into Microsoft Teams. All right. So, firstly, before starting this, like what are the benefits of using SharePoint Framework as a platform for your Microsoft Teams tab? Okay, so the development model is similar to SharePoint Framework web parts. Then any of the web part which we already have developed in SPFX can be exposed as a tab or even as a personal app to Microsoft Teams. So this SPFX offers different scoping options to expose SPFX web part as a custom tab or a personal app. And then your tab will be executed in the context of the underlying SharePoint site behind that specific team. So this means that you can take advantage of any SharePoint specific APIs or functionalities in your web part. So quickly see like how we can build our Teams tab as well as personal app with SPFX. But before that, quickly, it's like, for example, if I open up my Microsoft Teams, then we will be able to add the tab from here by going to any of the team and then navigating to any of the channel. From here, we can just click on plus, and from here, we'll be able to add a tab. At the same time, from this left navigation or this left rail, we can click on apps, and from here we'll be able to add any of the apps which we call as a personal app inside Microsoft Teams. So I hope that that sets the foundation for Teams tab as well as the personal app. So let's take a scenario of first thing like how we can build Teams tab with SPFX. So with the release of SharePoint Framework version 1.8, Microsoft introduced the possibility to build tabs as the Microsoft Teams using SharePoint Framework solution, which means any of your SharePoint Framework solution can now be easily ported to Microsoft Teams without any need for external services. The values which are specified in this supported host headers, which we will see bit later, but just wanted to set this context, will be used or at least that will decide how the users will be able to work with your web part. Then secondly, we have this building the personal app with SPFX. Then again, as a part of SPFX version 1.10, you can also publish your SPFX solution as Microsoft Teams personal app. So a personal app in Microsoft Teams is an app that user can install and then it can be accessed through the left rail of the Teams app. So let's see that in example, like how it looks like. So here we have one simple web part. So this is the SPFX web part, how it looks by default. So when this particular SPFX web part, it is a very simple one, nothing fancy here. We just have few labels from where we want to get the information about the SharePoint site where this particular web part is hosted. So in a simple term, what we can do is probably we can just edit this particular page, and so this is the modern experience, and from here we can click this plus icon, and from here we'll be able to add our own web part as well as the web part which are given by Microsoft. So all of the apps that we can see here, for example, a button, call to action, link, quick links, spacer, stream, all those are provided by Microsoft. And on top of it, we can create our own uh, web parts here, and then all those web parts can be deployed to SharePoint site. Right. So I hope that that sets the context for the SPFX web part. So this is how the SPFX web part looks like. So here we have one SPFX web part which is specifically hosted on this particular SharePoint site. So this is the SharePoint site that we have, this SP demo SharePoint site, and this SPFX web part is hosted on that particular site. So from here we can notice that when it is hosted in a SharePoint site, it is able to detect that this particular web part is running in the context of SharePoint site, and then it can take up all of the information about that particular site and then show it to the user. Then let's say, for example, if we take this same web part to Microsoft Teams. So again, once we come to the Microsoft Teams, we can just click on this plus icon here to add the tab. And from here, we can search for our web part, which I already have added. But from here, you'll be able to locate that particular web part and then add that SPFX web part, SharePoint Framework web part, as a tab inside Microsoft Teams. So the quick difference that you will notice here is that when it was running in the context of SharePoint site, it was able to detect that it is running in the context of SharePoint site, and it can pull the information about that SharePoint site. But now that when it is running in the context of Microsoft Teams, it can easily detect that particular context, and then it can start pulling the information about that team. So for example, right now this web part is lies in uh, busted mind team. So it is able to detect that it is in this particular team, and from here we'll be able to get more information about this team, and then we'll be able to use that information in our teams tab. Right. Again, same thing, that we can just click here, and then from here we'll be also able to add that web part as a personal app. So the simple difference here is that this tab or the static tab will be visible to all of the users. On the other hand, these apps or these personal apps will be personal to the user. So let's say, for example, from here, if I add any of the tab or any of the app as a personal app, it will be only applicable to me, and then none of to the other users. Okay, so that was the basic difference. But just wanted to set the context, like how we can use this SPFX web part as a Teams tab as well as the personal tab. All right. So let's take it to the next level. Let's make it bit complicated and see how we can use SPFX web part as a Microsoft Teams messaging extension. All right. So messaging extension is nothing but, for example, if you go to the Microsoft Teams here, and then let's say we go to the general tab here. So if you click on this new conversation at the down bottom here, you will see few of the options here, and these are nothing but the messaging extensions. So for example, this favorite messaging extension is Giphy. So once I click on this Giphy, few pictures comes up, and then from here, let's say if we click on any of the image, that image will be shown to the user, and once we click send, this will be sent onto that particular channel. Right. So this is what is mean by the messaging extension. So messaging extension will give you one kind of a window wherein user can make a selection. Then once user selects that particular option, that entire information can be sent onto the channel of Microsoft Teams. All right. So we will see, like, then how we can create those SPFX web part and then host as Microsoft Teams messaging extension. So when building these web parts with SPFX version 1.11, you can enable them to be exposed as Microsoft Teams tab, even the personal app, or even the messaging extension. And then to expose your SharePoint framework web part as a messaging extension, you don't need to use any specific host in the supported host property. So before that, let's see what is mean by that supported host property, which I have been referring for a while. So what happens is that if we have any of the or if you want to create any of the SharePoint solution, in that case, simply that you can go to this command prompt and then you can just type yo at Microsoft/SharePoint. Then it will give you an option, or it will fall through a wizard by asking you certain questions about what kind of an web part you want to create, then what should be the name of that particular web part, what is the purpose behind that particular web part, and then again, like do we want to get this added to Microsoft Teams and all those things. So this is some kind of an wizard which will be asked by this yo. So yo is nothing but the Yeoman generator, which is nothing but this scaffolding tool for SharePoint framework. So here you can see the solution name. So you can give your solution name, or even you can specify like for which user, or sorry, for which platform you want to target this component. So let's say SharePoint Online only in this case, where you want to place that particular solution. So maybe in the current folder itself, or even you can create any of the other solutions. Then the second of or the third option that we have here is do we want allow tenant admin a choice for being able to deploy this solution to all the sites immediately. So that means whenever we will deploy this solution to SharePoint, do we want to have this available to all of our users immediately? So if yes, then you can say yes, or if you want to just have it rolled out to few of these sites in SharePoint, make the choice as no. Again, for example, if this particular solution that we are building, if it needs some kind of a special permissions to access any of the web APIs, in that case we will have to specify yes here, otherwise we can specify no. The major thing here is that what kind of an component do we want to create. So we can create a web part, we can create an extension, or we can create a library. So web part is nothing but simply the web part that we can see as a visual component onto our SharePoint site. So all of those can be created with this web part option. Extension is something like again, there are three type of an extensions, but again it will not directly have placement onto the SharePoint side, but from there we can at least target this Chrome area of SharePoint, or at least some of the list area of SharePoint. Then thirdly, library, that means, for example, if we have a common code which we want to share between various web parts or extensions that we are building out, all those common code can be dropped inside library. All right. Then once we click web part, in this case we can specify the name of the web part. By default it's hello world, so I will say hello world only. We can specify the description, and this is the major choice that how we want to create this solution. So we can either use no JavaScript framework, or we can use React. Again, previously there was option by which we will be able to create this SPFX web part with knockout, but again Microsoft has rolled that back, and now that we just have got two options that how we want to create this web part. So we have two options now. We can create it using a plain JavaScript, or we can use React in this case. Again, for example, if you want to use AngularJS or handlebars, you can select this no JavaScript framework, and then again there are few boilerplates available which you can add to our solution, and then from there you will be able to use React or even other framework or libraries inside your SPFX web part. So once the SPFX web part is created, this is how it will look like. So this is again most of the coding stuff that will be involved here. So we have few configuration sections here wherein we need to specify the configuration for running this particular web part or this particular solution. Then we have src, which is the source folder wherein we can write our entire code. Again, since we have used React, we can create those React components inside this, something like this we will explore in a while. And then again here we have a folder called as node modules, because this particular solution is created using npm packages. So all those packages will be downloaded under this node underscore modules folder. All right. And then again, interestingly, we have teams folder here, which we will again explore. But all of the, but yeah, but for example, if you want to expose your web part, the SharePoint framework web part to Microsoft Teams, then this is the place from where we can start with that. All right. So at least these are the major files that are part of this SPFX solution. And then, for example, if I open up this configuration or this manifest for this particular solution, so here you can see those supported hosts which we have been talking of. So the supported host represents like this particular app or this particular SPFX solution where it will be supported. So here we have various choices. So first one is SharePoint web part, and then again you can see we have Teams personal app, Teams tab, SharePoint full page. So for example, if we select this web part as a supported host of Teams tab or a personal app, only in that case we will be able to use those as a tab or as a personal app inside Microsoft Teams. Otherwise, we won't be. But again, once it comes to the messaging extension, we don't need that. So we don't need to expose our SPFX web part as a Teams tab or a Teams personal app, because morely that we want to create this as the um, SPFX, Microsoft Teams messaging extension. All right. So this is how it will look. I know the image is not that much of bigger to give you the idea, but at least from here you will get some idea. So from here you can see that I have clicked onto the messaging extension. Then it will show us few of the planets that we have pre-configured. Once we click that, that particular information about that particular planet will be posted onto the Microsoft Teams channel. So this is something called as the messaging extension. So we will see like how we can develop this kind of a messaging extension with SPFX. So firstly, let's see what are the things that we will need for this particular solution. So we will need one bot, we will need Microsoft Azure Web App, SPFX Web Part, obviously, because it is the one by which we'll be able to expose that as a Microsoft Teams messaging extension. And then lastly, we will need Microsoft Teams, where this entire solution will be hosted. All right. So these are the four major components that we will need to build out any of the solution like Planet Explorer. So let's start with bot. So firstly, to create a bot, we will need something called as a bot channel registration. So for that purpose, let me go to my Azure portal. So once you are in the Azure portal, what you can probably do is you can click on this create a resource, and from here you will be able to search for bot channel registration. And then from here we can create our own bot channel registration. So it is a very simple process that we can just give the bot handler, that means the name of that particular bot. Then we can specify the messaging endpoint. So what is mean by messaging endpoint is that it is one kind of an URL to which we will be able to communicate with that particular bot. All right. So once you fill out this particular form, the bot channel registration will be created, but it takes some time. So to save that particular time, I have pre-created the bot channel registration. So let me quickly open up that. So this is the bot channel registration that we already have in place. So this is the overview section of this particular bot channel registration. Then we do have few configurations here, and in the messaging endpoint here you can see this is the URL by which we can have communication with our bot. So once it comes to this particular URL, we can specify either ngrok URL, or even we can specify the Microsoft Azure Web App URL. All right. And then we have something here called as Microsoft App ID. It will be automatically generated. And once you click on manage, here under the certificates and secrets, we'll be able to create our new client secret which we can use in our solution to get authenticated to this bot channel registration. So maybe it sound bit complex, but once we will start to drill down through all these concepts, it will um, it will be obvious similarities that you will see. All right, so the next thing is that what we will need is this yo teams. So if you remember, we used this yeoman generator for creating the SPFX solution, which is yo at Microsoft slash SharePoint. Similarly, we have one yeoman generator for Microsoft Teams, by which we'll be able to generate the solutions which are for Microsoft Teams. So using this Yo Teams, we will be able to create our bot. So again, you can go back to the command prompt, just type Yo Teams. So let me do that quickly. So once you type Yo Teams, this will again give you the prompt by which you will be able to create your Teams app. All right, so let it load. Okay, let me do one thing. Okay, it is taking some time to load because I don't have the latest version installed of npm, but that should not be an issue. So let's do the yo teams again. So yo teams again, kind of an open source platform by which we'll be able to generate the teams app using javascript based languages or frameworks like react, or even with the no JavaScript framework. So here again we can specify the solution name. Then again we can use the folder, and then again this is the Teams app project that we want to create. You can specify your company name. This is the manifest version which will be used for representing your Microsoft Teams app, which will to specify, and then we will say quick scaffolding to yes. And then these are the type of apps that we can create for Microsoft Teams. So for example, we can create a tab, we can create a bot, we can create outgoing webhooks, connectors, messaging extension, command, localization support, and many things. So in this particular example, we will create a bot. So once we select that particular bot, this is how the solution will look like. So this is the solution that will be generated once we will select the bot. Again, the one thing that we have here is this environment. So here we can specify the host name where we want to host this particular application or this particular bot. Then here we can specify that app id, the password. The password should not be in the plain text format as I'm showing you here, but once it will be deployed to Microsoft Azure, it will be encrypted. But just for this demonstration purpose, I wanted to keep it very simple. For the same reason, we have this password as a plain text format. And from here, for the local debugging, we are hosting it onto port number 3007. So this is how our bot will be. And then what we can do here from this particular bot is we have one JSON file here called as planets.json, which we are using as our database for the planets. So this is the array of planets that we have. So we have information about Mercury, Venus, Earth, as well as around 8 planets information that we have. So in that information, we are just representing the ID, name, summary, the solar orbit years, and some more information or some more properties about that particular planet. So what we do is whenever there is any kind of a request comes to this particular bot for showing the information about this planet, so we have this code here, um, by which we can get the details about which information user is looking out for. So we can get that information with user data, and with this action.data we will be able to get the exact information what user is looking out for. And then what we simply do is we populate another adaptive card. So this place here, it is kind of an adaptive card. So again, for example, if I go back to my slide, so all this information that we see here, it is and kind of an adaptive card. So this one is a SPFX web part. Once we click on that, it sends the information to the bot, like which planet user it more interested in. And then this is the information which is posted to Microsoft Teams is a um, um, that particular adaptive card, so which is here. So what we do here is we compose that particular adaptive card, and then we simply return this adaptive card to our solution, and then it is posted as the card onto our teams. All right. So without again making it too much of complicated, what we will do is simply I will run this bot. So here the simple command to run this is gulp ngrok serve. So we are using ngrok, which is a free tool by which we'll be able to do the tunneling of the request from internet, because right now I don't want to host this solution onto Azure website, but at least I just want to host it on my local so that I can debug that. So I will just update this particular information about this ngrok. But again, in the production ready environments, what we will do is we can deploy this solution or this bot to Azure web app. So this is the third step, that we will deploy this onto the Microsoft Azure web app or onto the ngrok, and which will serve um, that endpoint for our bot. All right. So the next thing that we will need here is the SPFX solution. So the SPFX solution will is created with SPFX version 1.11, and then this is the SPFX solution that we have here. Again, we don't have any of the supported host headers. Again, o- why this SPFX web part is able to communicate with Microsoft Teams is with this compose extension. So because this is again one kind of an manifest for our teams, so the teams can detect that this particular app which is coming to teams is nothing but the compose extension, and from here it can detect that bot ID and what kind of a command we want to place in the teams channel compose box. So here we are specifying it as the planet explorer and what kind of a planet information we want to impose on. And then what happens from here is that we are showing that entire information about those planets in the form of a document card, which is again the Office 365 um, adaptive card. And then again we are showing all that information there, and then once we click on any of the planet, we simply send out that information to our bot. Then bot just creates the adaptive card out of it, and then that particular adaptive card gets sent out to our application. All right. So let's see like how it works. So now that we have this particular endpoint where our application is running, so for the simplicity, what I will do is I will just open up that um, site here. So it will ask us to add this particular app to Microsoft Teams. So we'll do it. We will open that into Microsoft Teams, and then this is how that Planet Explorer bot will look like. So now that in the bottom section here in this messaging extension, we do have Planet Explorer coming up. So once I click on that particular icon, it will open up all the planets that we have, and all this information is nothing but it is coming out from this JSON file. So in this JSON we have 8 planets which are being shown here, right? So the last one is Neptune, which we are able to see it here. So this one is entirely coming from the JSON file. So what we can do is we can just click on any of the planet. So this information will be sent out to the bot, and then that bot in turn decide like or get the more information about this particular planet, like the image of the planet, the information that we have stored here, like the summary, the orbit years, average distance, and all those things. It can take that information and it can post to Microsoft Teams as a messaging extension. So let's say, for example, again, if we click this again and we try to get information about Mars, so it will again detect that we are trying to get the information about Mars. It will compose that messaging extension, and then it will be sent out to our messaging extension. So what happened here is that we already had our solution created in the SharePoint framework or in the SharePoint, wherein we wanted to showcase some kind of an information. So in this case, it was just the planet, but let's say in your case, it could be any of the customer information that we want to present. And then when that particular customer will click on any of the specific item, we want to send out that particular information onto the Teams channel. So this is how we can extend all of our web parts that we have inside SharePoint to Microsoft Teams very easily. All right. Okay, and then in order to deploy this, this one is more of a SPFX part, but we can prepare something called as an SPFX package, which is in the form of SPPKG file. So for that, we need to run these two commands, and then we can deploy that SPPKG file to SharePoint tenant app catalog. And then this was the Teams folder which we were talking about. So again, for example, if I go back to my Teams, and if I open up this particular folder, so this is the folder which we have to drop to our Teams. So what we can do is we can just zip all these files together. We can just use send to zip. We can create that compose zip folder, and from here we can come to our Microsoft Teams. We can just click on apps, and from here we can upload this particular custom app to our tenant. So we can just select this zip explorer file, we can open, and we can get it deployed. So what happens once we deploy this particular file to Microsoft Teams, it will be available to Microsoft Teams as a app. So with that, for example, again, if I go to Microsoft Teams, to any of the team and any of the channel. So let's say this is the channel that we have specifically created for Planet Explorer. Uh, from here, it can detect that this particular app is added to our Microsoft Teams. Again, from here, we can click on that. It gives the similar experience which we had when we were uh, testing out this app in these silos. But again, this is kind of an SPFX solution which is running in the background, and then it is following all the requests and sending the information to Microsoft Teams. All right. So this is how we'll be able to get all of our SharePoint framework web parts that we have created to Microsoft Teams. All right. So the next part that we have is let's see how we can create the Teams meeting app experience with Microsoft Teams. So with the Microsoft Teams, I hope that everyone must be using this feature of scheduling the meetings. So what simply happens is that we can go to the calendar, then we click on any of these slot based on our preference, and then from here we can just schedule a new meeting. All right, so this is very much easy that we can use Microsoft Teams for scheduling the meeting. So we can send this invite to our colleagues, and then we can carry out the meeting and the conversation, even the video calls, chatting, uh, all those things at that particular time. So once it come to the Microsoft Teams meeting app, we have certain meeting life cycle. So the meeting app can deliver user experience for each stage of the meeting life cycle, including pre-meeting, in-meeting, or the post-meeting app experience, and then depending on to the attendees status. So we can integrate tabs, bots, even the messaging extensions in each stage of this meeting life cycle, so that we can build that pre-meeting kind of an experience, or in-meeting kind of an experience, or even post-meeting kind of an experience. So pre-meeting experience, that means we want to get some information as a pre-meeting experience before the meeting starts itself. In meeting, that means during our meeting, for example, if you want to carry out any of the survey, we want to get the opinion from all of the attendees, we can create those app. Post meeting, that means we want to get the feedback from the attendees, like how the meeting went, what are the improvement points, and all those things. It can be done using post meeting app experiences. So in this particular demo, we are going to see how we can create pre-meeting app experience with SharePoint. So with SPFX version 1.12.1, which is very recently launched just a couple of weeks back, it supports Microsoft Teams meeting app development. So this offers more power to the developers so that they can now extend SPFX web part to Microsoft Teams for building meeting app experiences. And then again, to expose your SPFX web part as a Teams meeting app, you don't again have to use any of these specific host header that we saw. But only thing that we can use in this particular solution is that we can just host those as a configurable tabs. All right. So in the previous example, we saw that we were hosting it as the compose extension for the messaging extensions part. But in this case, now that we will use it as a configurable tabs, because we want to use these app, this SPFX web part, as a tab inside our Microsoft Teams. So let's see like how this looks like before we walk through the demo, or walk through the code. So from here we can schedule a new meeting. So let's say I will just call it as a demo meeting, and then I will add few of the attendees to this particular meeting. I will invite few attendees, and then I will just simply send this invite to those attendees. So what happens is that now that we have this meeting scheduled, but before this particular meeting happens, maybe all of the attendees of this particular meeting, they may have few questions related to this meeting. So we are trying to build that pre-meeting kind of an experience with this. So again, here we can click on that plus icon to add a tab, and here we have our tab available called as Microsoft Teams pre-meeting questionnaire experience. All right. So this app will allow the attendees to ask the question before the meeting starts. So at least they can post all of their questions. The other attendees can also read that question, and then even the organizer can respond to that questions. So we can just click on new question and probably just ask about recording, like will this meeting be recorded, right? So probably we will just ask this question. So this is how it will appear that Nandadeep has asked this particular question about the recording. So what happens is whenever the organizer, he will open up this particular meeting. So this is the view that he will be getting, and then once he goes to the meeting questionnaire, from here he will be able to see all of the questions asked by the attendees as a pre-meeting app. So what happens is that before the meeting starts, probably he can reply to these questions there only, or even during the meeting, all these questions can be answered. So this kind of an app give you that kind of an experience by which we can ask the question beforehand to the meeting organizer or to the other attendees, and all those questions can be used later on when the meeting starts. So it gives that kind of an pre-meeting experience by which we'll be able to achieve this. So what happens that in the background we create one SharePoint list. So now that I'm going back to SharePoint, and we have this list called as a Teams meeting questionnaire. So for example, now if I just sort by newer to the order, you can see that this particular question has got created here. So this was just a minute ago. So what happens is that we saw that there is a quite correlation between your Microsoft Teams team as well as with SharePoint. So for each of the Microsoft team, there is a SharePoint site in the background, and then we can make use of the SharePoint context whenever we are using with Microsoft Teams app. So we are making use of this similar functionality or similar capabilities that is we discussed, and then whenever there is a new question being asked, what we can do is we can locate the SharePoint site in the background, and in that SharePoint site we have one list created wherein we can store all those questionnaires. And whenever there will be more of questions getting added to this particular list, all those questions will start appearing here, and then we'll be able to handle all those questions during the meeting time. So let's see like how this kind of an solutions can be built. So as we saw, we can use these configurable tabs, and from this particular tab we can expose our SPFX web part as a channel tab, or as a private chat tab, meeting tab, meeting details tab, or even the meeting side panel. So because of this context that we have specified here, whenever we click onto this plus icon, we are able to see that particular app appearing in the Microsoft Teams meeting experience. All right. So this is the driving factor for that particular app to get seen into the Teams meeting app. And then we have few of the services by which we can make a call to SharePoint list, wherein we have all of our data stored, and we can just bring out that data based on the meeting ID to which we are looking at. So now that we have generated this particular meeting, so each of the meeting in Microsoft Team has got a unique meeting ID, which is in the format something like this, which is a very long, not that human readable format, but this one is a uniquely generated for each of the meeting in a Microsoft Teams. So we can use that as a primary column for us to store that information. And then using this PNP.js, we can connect to SharePoint list. So this is the SharePoint list that we have, and then we can pull out all that information. Again, for example, if you want to add any of the question to the SharePoint list, we can again make use of that PNP.js API, and then we can simply add one more item, which is the question which was asked by the attendee into the Microsoft Teams. And then what happens in the front end is that we showcase all those items which are inside this particular list for that particular meeting ID, and then we show all of them in this kind of an activity item. So all this information that you see happening here is called as an activity. So each of the activity inside it is called as activity item. And then for example, whenever there is a question, we can create one React component by which we'll be able to showcase that entire structure as a ask question. So again, for example, if I go to this tsx file, which is the React component, so this is the text box as well as the button that we see whenever we click on this new question or add a question. So this is how this simple solution has been developed. So at least this kind of a solution will give you the flexibility by which we can expose our SPFX web part or SharePoint apps as a Teams meeting app. All right. So with that, we are coming to the end of our session. So here are a few of the resources. For example, if you already have your SPFX web parts created or any of the apps that you already have in your SharePoint, in that case, you can bring those as a messaging extension, as a personal app, or even as the tab inside Microsoft Teams, or even you can create the meeting app experience with those SharePoint framework solutions. So here are few good resources to start working on that. And again, all of the code which I shown you is available under these Git repositories. So this is the PNP Git repository under which the meeting app experience code is available, and the Planet Explorer Git code is available under my Git repository. So if you are interested, probably I will encourage you to go through this code and then see like how this code works together, and all of the SharePoint apps that we have, how we can easily bring those apps into Microsoft Teams. So we explore like how we can create our tabs, how we can create the personal app as well as the messaging extension and the meeting app experience with Microsoft Teams and SharePoint all together. All right. So with that, thank you very much for having me here and listening actively to this particular session. So if you have any question, we can jump to the questions. But thank you very much again.
Wow, wow. Thank you so much, Nandi, for that 1 hour stretched session. It has been thoroughly engaging from the beginning till now. And one thing that I just want to say, because of the audience composure, we have seen a couple of people, commenting and reaching out to me that see that this session seems a bit technical, which of
Correct.
course, based on what we have dealt with in the previous episode of Metro Power Night, we know that yes, it is technical, and more importantly, before we came up with this session, we also know it's a technical part, but the goal is to get people exposed to the possibilities. Tomorrow, there might be issue, there might be reason to leverage on this learning within your organization. You can remember, oh, I have been part of a program before where Nandip showed us how to do this, how to leverage on the SharePoint framework within Microsoft Teams. And that way, you can follow up through the resources and the links that you are going to share with us. We will communicate that to the entire community, and we can always follow that on the GitHub URL that you posted, as well as the link to those different learning points that we need to also follow through. All right. So for now, there's no question. Even those that have been sent to me personally, there are no questions. Also on our YouTube and LinkedIn, there are no questions. So It's
All right.
just to
Thank you.
say a very big thank you, Nandi. We so much treasured your time, and I also hope things get better in India.
Thank you very much. And again, just one thing to add here. I know that when we are working with Power Platform gives us more capabilities by which we can have the solutions developed with low code or no kind of a thing. When it comes to SharePoint framework, we have lots of coding, lots of coding. I know that
Obviously,
because of that,
very obvious.
it's technical. Yeah, that's obvious. But again, yeah, means again, it is kind of an thing to discuss, or at least thing to note, like whenever we are using SPFX solutions versus wherever we are using these Power Platform solutions, because again they have their own importance. Again, they have their own areas in which they can be better judged together, or at least they can be better placed together. So whenever for example, let's say the Power Platform, we don't have that much of capability to go into the depth and create our own solutions. On that front, for example, when we go to the SPFX, we have the entire control over what can be done, how it can be done. But yeah, again, it is up to everyone to choose out which platform to use. But again, just wanted to give one more uh, option, or present one more option by which we'll be able to develop all those solutions on top of SharePoint as well as Microsoft Teams. But again, yeah, thank you very much for having me here and giving me this opportunity to present one more option to this community. All right. Thank you very much for that.
Yeah, thank you, Nandip. We will definitely reach out to you, update you if there are other questions later that could come up after people,
Yes.
consume these resources. We're going to get that across to you, and hope we get the responses as well back to the respective community members. All
Sure, sure.
right.
Definitely. Definitely.
Okay, thank you, everyone. I kind of understand today it's technical. You cannot follow through by typing or by designing similar solution immediately like we used to do before. But take note that no knowledge is a waste, and there's a reason. Like Nandipa said, there is a gap. There is a distinction between the Power Platform solution and the SharePoint framework. But there are places where you see SharePoint coming very handy, SharePoint framework, and while others, like we've been doing in the past, we've seen Microsoft Power Platform tools so handy as well. In the next episode of this, we're going to do something very interesting. This time around, it's going to be an hands-on session leveraging on Microsoft Power Automate, on SharePoint, the SharePoint list, and more or less some graphic designs of PowerPoint work. What are we going to do? I'm going to show you on an enterprise level how to automate job birthday and work anniversary for the workplace. And I believe that one you will also be very interested and you'd like to be part of it. So thank you everyone once again for being part of this session today. And until we meet again, thank you, and we have a countdown.